Chapter 4 of Subspace Survivors by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kirk Ziegler. The Procyon bored on through space at one unchanging gravity of acceleration. It may not seem, at first glance, that one gravity would result in a very high velocity, but when it is maintained steadily for days and weeks and months, it builds up to a very respectable speed. Nor was there any question of power. The Procyon's atomics did not drive the ship, but merely energized the cheaters, and the cheater effect engines that tapped the energy of the expanding universe itself. Thus, in less than 6 months, the Procyon had attained a velocity almost half that of light. At the estimated midpoint of the flight, the spaceship, still at one gravity of drive, was turned end for end, so that for the ensuing 5 and a fraction months she would be slowing down. A few weeks after the turnover, Adams seemed to have more time. At least he devoted more time to the expectant mothers, even to the point of supervising Destin and Jones in the construction of a weirdly wired device by means of which he studied and photographed the unborn child each woman bore. He said nothing, however, until Barbara made him talk. "Listen, you egregious clam," she said firmly. "I know darn well I've been pregnant for at least 7 months, and I ought to be twice this big. Our clock isn't that far off. Carl said that by wavelengths or something, it's only about 3% fast. And you've been pussyfooting around, hem-hawing around all this time. Now, Uncle Andy, I want the truth. Are we in for a lot of trouble?" "Trouble? Of course not. Certainly not. No trouble at all, my dear. Why, you've seen the pictures. Here, look at them again. See? Absolutely normal fetus. Yours too, Bernice. Perfect. No malformations of any kind." "Yes, but for what age?" Bernice asked pointedly. "4 months, say. I see. I was exposed to a course of embryology myself once." "But that's the interesting part of it," Adams enthused. "Fascinating, and indubitably supremely important. In fact, it may point out the key datum underlying the solution of our entire problem. If this zeta field is causing this seemingly peculiar biological effect, that gives us a tremendously powerful new tool. For certain time vectors in the generalized matrix become perimeters. Thus, certain determinants, notably all-important delta prime sub mu, become manipulable by... But you aren't listening." "I'm listening, Pops, but nothing is coming through. But thanks much anyway. I feel a lot better, knowing that I'm not going to give birth to a monster. Or are you really sure?" "Of course I'm sure," Adams snapped testily, and Barbara led Destin aside. "Have you got the slightest idea of what he was talking about?" she asked. "Just the slightest, if any. Either that time is relative, no, that is so elementary he wouldn't mention it. Maybe he's figured out a variable time of some kind or other. Anyway, you girls' slowness in producing is giving the old boy a big lift, and I'm mighty glad of it. But aren't you worried, sweetheart? Not even in the least little bit?" "Of course not," and Destin very evidently meant just that. "But I am. I can't help but be. Why aren't you?" "Because Doc isn't, and he knows his stuff, believe me. He can't lie any better than a 3-year-old. And he's sure that all 4 of you are just as safe as though you were in God's left-hand hip pocket." "Oh, that's right. I never thought of it that way. So I don't have anything to worry about, do I?" She lifted her lips to be kissed, and the kiss was long and sweet. Time flew past until, one day a couple of weeks short of arrival, Adams pushed up to Destin and Jones. "I have it," he shouted, and began to spout a torrent of higher, very much higher, mathematics. "Hold it, Doc." Destin held up an expostulatory hand. "I read you 0 and 10. Can't you delouse your signal? Whittle the stuff down to our size?" "Well..." The scientist looked hurt, but did consent to forego the high math. "The discharge is catastrophic. The energy equivalent something in the order of a magnitude of 10,000 discharges of lightning, and unfortunately I do not know what it is. It is virtually certain, however, that we will be able to dissipate it in successive decrements by use of long, thin leads extending toward a high point of the planet." "Wire, you mean? What kind?" The material is not important, except that it should have sufficient tensile strength to support as many miles as possible of its own length. We've got dozens of coils of hookup wire, Destin said, but not too many miles, and it's soft stuff. Gram wire, Jones snapped his finger. Of course, Destin agreed. Hundreds of miles of it. Float the sensor down on a Hotchkiss. Tear out, Jones objected. Bailey it, spidered out to 20 or so big flat feet. That'll take metal, but we can cannibal the whole middle without weakening the structure. Sure. Surges, backlash, remote it. Check. Remote everything to Baby 2 and... Would you mind delousing your signal? Adams asked caustically. Excuse please, Doc. A guy does talk better in his own lingo, doesn't he? Well, gram wire is a 1.3 millimeter diameter, ultra-high tensile steel wire, used for rewrapping the grams, you know. No, I don't know. What are grams? Why, they're the intermediates between the cheaters. Okay, there's something like bottles that have to stand terrifically high pressures. That's what I want to know. Such wire will do very nicely. Note now that our bodies must be grounded very thoroughly to the metal of the ship. You're so right. We'll wrap the girls in silver mesh underwear up to the eyeballs, and run leads as big as my wrist to the frame. The approach was made, and the fourth planet out from that strange sun was selected as a ground. The planet was not at all like Earth. It had very little water, very little atmosphere, and very little vegetation. It was twice as massive as Earth. Its surface was rugged and jagged. One of its stupendous mountain ranges had sharp peaks more than 40,000 feet high. There's one thing we must do, Adams said. I have barely begun to study this Zeta field, and this one may very well be unique, irreplaceable. We must therefore launch all the life craft, except number 2, of course, into separate orbits around this sun so that a properly staffed and properly equipped expedition can study it. Your proper expedition might get its pants burned off too. There's always that possibility, but I will insist on being assigned to the project. This information, young man, is necessary. Okay, Doc. And it was done, and in a few days, the Procyon hung motionless a good 500 miles high, directly above the highest, sharpest mountain peak they had been able to find. The Bailey boom, with its spider-like web network of grounding cables and with a large pulley at its end, extended 200 feet straight out from the side of the ship. A 25-mile coil of gram wire was mounted on the remote-controlled Hotchkiss reel. The end of the wire was run out over the pulley. A 15-pound weight, to act as a sensor and to keep the wire from fouling, was attached, and a few hundred feet of wire were run out. Then, in Lifecraft 2, as far away from the business district as they could get, the human bodies were grounded, and Destin started the reel. The wire ran out, and ran, and ran, and ran. The full 25 miles were paid out, and still nothing happened. Then very slowly, Destin let the big ship move straight downward, until finally it happened. There was a blast beside which the most terrific flash of lightning ever seen on Earth would have seemed like a firecracker. In what was almost a vacuum though she was, the whole immense mass of the Procyon was hurled upward like a cork out of a champagne bottle. And as for what felt like, since the 5 who experienced it could never describe it, even to each other, it is obviously indescribable by or to anyone else. As Bernice said long afterward, when she was being pressed by a newsman, just tell 'em it was the living end, and that it was as good a description as any. The girls were unwrapped from their silver mesh cocoons, and after a minute or so of semi-hysterics were as good as new. Then Destin stared out into the scope and gulped. Without saying a word, he waved a hand, and the others looked. It seemed as though the entire tip of the mountain was gone, had become a seething, flaming volcano on a world that had known no volcanism for hundreds of thousands of years. "And what," said Destin finally, "do you suppose happened to the other side of the ship?" The boom, of course, was gone. So were all 20 of the grounding cables, which, each the size of a man's arm, had found out in all directions to anchorages welded solidly to the vessel's skin and frame. The anchorages, too, were gone, and tons upon tons of high-alloy steel plating and structural members for many feet around where each anchorage had been. Steel had run like water, had been blown away in gusts of vapor. "Shall I try the radio now, Doc?" Destin asked. "By no means. This first blast would, of course, be the worst, but there will be several more of decreasing violence." There were. The second, while it volatilized the boom, and its grounding network merely fused portions of the anchorages. The third took only the boom itself. The fourth took only the dangling miles of wire. At the sixth trial, nothing apparently happened, whereupon the wire was drawn in, and 200-pound mass of steel was lowered until it was in firm and quiescent contact with the solid rock of the planet. "Now you may try your radio," Adams said. Destin flipped a switch and spoke quietly but clearly into a microphone. "Procyon 1 to Control 6. Flight 849, Subspace Radio Test 95, I think. How do you read me, Control 6? The reply was highly unorthodox. It was a wild yell, followed by words not directed at Destin at all. "Captain Reamer, Captain French, Captain Holloway, anybody. It's the Procyon that was lost a year ago, unless some fool is playing a dumb joke." "It's no joke, I hope." Another voice, crisp and authoritative, came in, growing louder as its source approached the distant pickup. "Or somebody will rot in jail for 100 years. Procyon 1 to Control 6, Destin said again, his voice not quite steady this time. Both girls were crying openly and joyfully. "How do you read me, French, old horse? This is Procyon 1, the Rund himself. Hi, babe," the new voice roared, then quieted to a normal volume. "I read you 8 and 1. Survivors? 5. Second Officer Jones, our wives, and Dr. Andrew Adams, a fellow of the College of Advanced Study. He's solely responsible for our being here, so skip that for now. In a life craft? No, after this long it must be the ship. Not navigable, of course. Not in subspace, and only so-so in normal. The cheaters are okay, but the whole top is spun out and the rest of her won't hold air. Air hell. She won't hold shipping crates. All the Wesleys are shot, and all the Q converters. Half the grams are leaking like sieves, and... Skip that too, just a sec. I'll cut in the downstairs recorder. Now start at your last check and tell us what happened since. It's a long story. Unwind it, Runt. I don't give a damn how long it is. Not a full detailed report, just hit the high spots, but don't leave anything really important out." "Wow," Jones remarked audibly. "What a man Frenchy. Like the ex-urbanite said to the gardener, I don't want you to work hard. Just take big shovelfuls and lots of them per minute." "That's enough out of you, Herc, my boy. You'll be next. Go ahead, babe." Destin went ahead and spoke almost steadily for 30 minutes. He did not mention the gangsters or any personal matters. Otherwise, his report was accurate and complete. He had no idea that everything he said was going out on an Earth-wide hookup, or that many other planets monitoring constantly all subspace channels were hooking on. When he was finally released, Captain French said with a chuckle, "Off the air for a minute. You have no idea what an uproar this has stirred up already. They let them have all your stuff, but we aren't putting out a thing until some brass gets out here and gets the real story." "That is the real story, damn it." "Oh, sure, and a very nice job, too, for an extemporaneous effort, if it was. Semantics says, though, that in a couple of spots it smells like slightly rancid cheese, and no, keep still. Too many planets listening in. Verbum sap. Anyway, the press smells something too, and they're screaming their lungs out, especially the Sob sisters. Now, Herc, on the air, you're orbiting the fourth planet of the sun. What sun? Where?" "I don't know. Unlisted. We're in completely unexplored territory. Standard reference angles are as follows," and Jones read off a long list of observations, not only the brightest stars of the galaxy, but also the standard reference points, such as Estoratus, laying outside it. "When you get that stuff all plotted, you'll find a hell of a big confusion. But I hope there aren't enough stars in it but what you can find us sometime. Off the air for good, I hope. Don't make me laugh, Buster. Your probable center will spear it. If there's ever more than one star in any confusion, you set it up. I'll eat all the extras. But there's a dozen big brains here, gnawing their nails off up to the wrist to talk to Adams all the rest of the night. So put him on and let's get back to sleep, huh? They're cutting this mic now." Just a minute, Destin snapped. What's your time? 3:14:37. So go back to bed, you night-prowling owl. What day, month, and year? Destin insisted. Friday, Sep. French's voice was replaced by a much older one, very evidently that of a fellow of the college. After listening for a moment to the newcomer and Adams, Barbara took Destin by the arm and led him away. Just a little bit of that gibberish is a bountiful sufficiency, husband mine, so I think we'd better take Captain French's advice, don't you? Since there was only one star in Jones' confusion, by the book, Volume of Uncertainty, finding the Procyon was no problem at all. High brass came in quantity, and the entire story, except for one bit of biology, was told. 2 huge subspace-going machine shops also came, and 1,000 mechanics who worked on the crippled liner for almost 3 weeks. Then the Procyon started back for Earth under her own space drive, under the command of Captain Theodore Jones. His first, last, and only subspace command, of course, since he was now a married man. Destin had wanted to resign while still a first officer, but his superiors would not accept his resignation until his promotion, for outstanding services, came through. Thus, ex-Captain Carlyle Destin and his wife were deadheading, not quite back to Earth, but to the transfer point for the planet of New Mars. Theodore Warner Destin is going to be born on New Mars, where he should be, Barbara had said, and Destin had agreed. But suppose she's a Theodora, Bernice had twitted her. Uh-huh, Barbara said calmly. I just know he's a Theodore. Uh-huh, I know. Bernice had nodded her spectacular head. And we wanted a girl, so she is. Barbara Bernice Jones, her name is. A living doll. Although both pregnancies were well advanced, neither was very near full term. Thus it was clear that both periods of gestation were going to be well over a year in length, but none of the 5 persons who knew it so much as mentioned the fact. To Adams, it was only one tiny datum in an incredibly huge and complex mathematical structure. The parents did not want to be pilloried as crackpots, as public-seeking liars, or as being unable to count. And they knew that nobody would believe them if they told the truth, even, or especially, no medical doctor. The more any doctor knew about gynecology and obstetrics, in fact, the less he would believe any such story as theirs. Of what use is it to put such puny and trivial things as facts against rock-ribbed, iron-bound, entrenched authority? The 5, however, knew, and Destin and Jones had several long and highly unsatisfactory discussions, at first with Adams and later between themselves. At the end of the last such discussion, a couple of hours out from the transporter point, Jones lit a cigarette savagely and rasped. Wherever you start, or whatever your angle of approach, he always boils it down to this. Subjective time is measured by the number of learning events experienced. I ask you, babe, what does that mean, if anything? It sounds like it ought to mean something, but I'll be damned if I know what. Destin gazed thoughtfully at the incandescent tip of his friend's cigarette. However, if it makes the old boy happy and gives the college a toehold on subspace, what do we care? End of Chapter 4 by E. Doc Smith. Recording by Kirk Ziegler, Ogden, Utah. Voiceovers by Kirk.com. End of Subspace Survivors by E. Doc Smith.